a senior European Union negotiator, but I think he's stuck in the carriageway between various parts of the this vast meeting place. So Geoffrey Allen and I will talk, just go over some of the events of the day. Well, one in particular, there's a very big story which has brought the conference to life in a sense. I've got one printout here: Copenhagen Climate Summit in disarray after Danish text leak. And certainly this is what everyone is talking about. So perhaps, Geoffrey, can you fill us in a bit from what's going on?
Sure. I just pulled this up from The Guardian on my screen, and I'm having a look now. Basically what happened here is that a group of countries, a very small group of wealthy countries, the US, UK, and Denmark, came together to put together a text, a draft text that they're hoping will get through. This is what's being understood based on what's come out. And this text was only shown to a few other wealthy country governments so far, early in the conference as it is. But somebody leaked it out to the Guardian newspaper in the UK, and so the information about this text got out, and it's really ruffled a lot of feathers among the non-wealthy countries. So basically, just to give you a sense of why this is creating so much discord here in the summit. I don't know if you can pull up my screen here, but there are a couple bullet points about what this text would do. One, it says it would force developing countries to agree to specific emission cuts and measures that were not part of the original UN agreement. It says it would divide poor countries further by creating a new category of developing countries called the most vulnerable. Presumably, this means it would separate the China and India's from the most vulnerable countries in Africa. It would also weaken the UN's role in handling climate finance. This role would predominantly be given to the World Bank, from what I've understood just from a quick reading of this text. And finally, it says it would not allow poor countries to emit more than 1.44 tons of carbon per person by 2050, while allowing rich countries to emit 2.67 tons. So that's quite striking. That poor countries would only be given just barely more than half of the emissions allowance per person as rich countries would have. So it's quite a striking text, and it's raised a lot of eyebrows around here, to say the least.
Yeah, well, yeah, or eyebrows certainly. Yeah, a couple of things to say about that. I think one is, I mean, this has been the whisper for a couple of days here, and indirectly it's been raised, the so-called Danish text. When a group of journalists asked the Danes about it, a Danish spokesperson, she said, her defense was, you could hear gears going into reverse rapidly, that, well, this is just one of the sort of texts we're preparing for any eventuality, and if you're the host government, then you have to be prepared for such eventualities. But wasn't entirely convincing, but that was the Danish case. And now that this has come out, of course, it's put the cat among the pigeons, because it's very specific. I think that's what's shocked a lot of people. This isn't just a contingency plan. It looks like very much a plan B. And the other thing to say is it's probably, for several weeks now, there's been talk that a number of rich countries really would like to ditch the Kyoto Protocol effectively and roll it into a new agreement with very specifically binding commitments on developing countries, which were not in Kyoto. So I think that's brought that into the open, and now we perhaps know a little more clearly what some countries are playing for here, what they really want. But it's very interesting, and of course we'll have to see. There'll be a series of press conferences, I think, tomorrow and probably this evening, by developing countries expressing their anger with it, I would imagine. So is there anything else coming up?
Yeah, I just did a quick Google News search to see what other news organizations are talking about from the conference here. The big news seems to be still the U.S. decision yesterday by the Barack Obama administration to allow the Environmental Protection Agency to regulate greenhouse gases, which is certainly caused a little bit of controversy between the two parties in the United States, but I think there's been widespread approval of that here at the conference. Many countries around the world are very pleased, and they see it as a sign that the Obama administration is actually willing to step forward and actually make climate change a priority, which is something that, as someone who lives in the U.S., I can say pretty clearly has not seemed like a priority in the media anyway. The way the media has been covering the administration and the issues over the past several months, it's been all healthcare all the time with a little bit of jobs mixed in. So it's interesting to see Obama make this decision on day one of the conference, and it'll be clearly it's leading up to his speech here next week, where he'll make it perfectly clear what he intends to do.
And we're still hoping we'll get a US NGO spokesperson to come in later on this evening to discuss that and put it into some sort of perspective. So you never know here. There's so much going on. There's so many emergency meetings and people being summoned by their ministers or ambassadors that they're at the beck and call. So we'll see. But he had promised to come. So hopefully at about 7:30 Danish time he'll turn up. So that's certainly two big issues have come up. Is the rest details or smaller things?
There's one other interesting thing that I think is worth noting. It's not about the conference per se, but I mentioned earlier on today's program that the UN's weather agency that monitors the weather and follows the science related to weather has done the numbers for this year, and this year being the final year of this decade. And it announced this morning that they now expect that this decade, 2000-2009, will be the warmest on record ever. And that's quite striking. This isn't 20 or 30 years they've been keeping records. It's since 1850. So all the way back to 1850, these past 10 years as a chunk formulate the warmest decade on record. So that's quite a striking stat, I think.
Yeah, well, that'll certainly, that sort of thing gets round and is put around the meeting, so it helps energize delegates, I think, and the backsliders, it gives them a bit of a kick, I think, when anyone is expressing doubts about it. It's good for them, I think. So yeah, so they're the big stories, are they? There's nothing else. I noticed a story earlier about something about Christmas coming early in Copenhagen, but I don't think that was to do with this conference, was it?
That one seems to have dropped off the Google News list.
I've got actually there was a briefing, one of the best attended briefings here every day is by the US delegation, because we're all waiting to see what the US will do, and he was very positive. Well, that's his job to be positive, I guess, but he made a rather convincing case about it, and he, just for those of you that follow this sort of detailed image, he said that Obama now has put the US on a pathway towards a 30% emissions reduction in 2025 and a 42% emission reduction in 2030, which are quite good figures, if so. And he was quite scathing about some of the critics of the US policy, saying, essentially he was saying, you're nitpicking, in the end we'll get there. We may not get there in the same time frame, or we may do it in a different, we may be slower up front and faster at the back, but we'll get there. And in fact, he made... I'm not sure I've got it in this press release, but he said in the end we won't be more than a millionth out of the European Union reductions, and scientifically a millionth made no difference. So he was very positive that the US was in on the deal, really.
Yeah, I'll make a couple points on that. The 30% number is pretty interesting. That's because that's the same number that France and Britain in the last 2 days have said that they're going to push the EU to reach. So basically what that means is each country is setting the target that it's pledging to reach for reducing its greenhouse gases by a certain amount by a certain date. And we're talking about 2020 now. So when people just throw out numbers like that, often 2020 is the date they're talking about. So this 30% number is an interesting one. The EU has so far pledged 20% by 2020. Many activists, climate scientists firmly believe that the science shows that 50% or even more is needed by 2020 in order to get to 80% reductions by 2050, which is ultimately what's needed to avert the worst consequences of climate change. And this is based on not just a few scientists. This is the IPCC, the body that looks at all the science, the hundreds of thousands of articles out there, and brings it all together, the real solid stuff. These are the numbers they're talking about. So the 30% number is certainly a step up. Everyone's looking at that as a step towards what the science says. But I've heard many people say, that number still only gives us less than a 50-50 chance of averting a catastrophe, a global catastrophe. We heard a woman this morning, or depending on where you are, this afternoon or evening on our show, talking about the oceans and the impact of the warming climate on the oceans, and how the oceans capture carbon, but they're capturing less and less and less every day as they fill up. So it's interesting to see them throw around these numbers that may seem like a step forward, and others will say it's not nearly good enough. James Hansen, the most famous climate scientist who's really pushed this for decades, he says that no deal here in Copenhagen would be better than the deal that may come, because the deal that may come, it will not do enough anyway, and so they should just scrap it and recognize that they need to do something else entirely.